Hello,
Hey,
hello, everyone. Welcome. Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever
wherever
you
you
are.
may be. Yeah, wherever you are. And good to see you again, Fatí.
Good to see you too, Rick. So, I am super excited about this conversation as we dig a little bit deeper into everything that you shared with us about your experience of your life and your life story, right? How you got here and what you do today, and just really I know that we both felt like, oh my God, that was so much to share. Even when you interviewed me, it was like, yeah, it took over an hour to get to just the facts, right?
Yeah, and that kind of it worried me a little bit because like I was sharing with you before. So I think part of what we're going to do today is, and we'll find out for sure by the end of the show, is that we both interviewed each other,
Right.
and there was some interesting things that came through, and some reflections afterwards, and we thought we would just go back in and touch bases again about the experience of being interviewed, what came up after the interview, for each of us, and maybe go into a little bit more into the insights of where the shifts started to really happen, because we kind of ran out of time, and because there's, like with every life, there's a lot of shit that goes on, and
Right.
some of it,
Right.
right, and some of it feels like it's important to tell, and some things aren't. And I was just telling you just before we came on, um I don't tell people a lot about my past. I
Right.
don't.
Right.
And I'm not sure if it's something I'm afraid of people learning about it. I think more now that I'm sort of reflecting on it a little bit, is I don't I don't get to choose the narrative of what they make out of my past,
Right. Right.
right? So they could hear things that would say, "Oh my God, I didn't know about that person," or that, it's like, "Oh, kind of a thing." And I mean, my and this comes from work and other things, but my past is just my past. I've learned through the years, that it doesn't have to define me. I'm not denying I had a past. We all have a past,
Right.
but
But
it but it
it's
go ahead.
created who you are today. It was just the means to an end, right? Our
Well, it
past
did.
took us here, right? Shaped us to be who we are. And like part of why I also felt like I would love to actually come back on and reflect on here were the facts of what happened and what led us here. Well,
Yeah.
how did those specific facts, you know, created some form of transformation, right? Because we have changed along the way, right? In what way do they facilitate that change? In what way do they redirect us? Because it really all is a nudge, right, from the universe. Go this way, or like you're going the right way, or like you just shift a little bit, not this way, go that way, right? So, in what way all these redirections, the facts, right,
Hmm.
shaped us to be who we are, or pointed us to go into this direction, or perhaps even find our purpose, or like reinvent ourselves, right? Like I feel like to some degree we all have reinvented ourselves a gazillion times, right? For some people, I mean, we're constantly evolving and changing, right? So we never are the person that we are in this moment. We're constantly changing. But for some people, when the circumstances are really like tragic or big, like
Hmm.
that shift is very visible and noticeable, right? But truth be told, we're always evolving and changing.
Well, yes, and I heard a really interesting phrase. I think it was from Richard Rohr. Uh, we are always doing, when we reflect back to our past, right? Because you're absolutely correct. Everything I done in the past has brought me here today. Like, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I'm here today because of the things and decisions and all the experiences. When I reflect back at, though, is that we were always doing the right thing, but maybe for the wrong reasons back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I heard that, because like we do things out of survival. Like back then, as children, right, we have no idea what's really going on, and our only instinct is to survive. So we do all the things that we think are right in the moment,
right,
but for the wrong reasons. And so what I'm finding, as I even get deeper into the study, is that, like Carl Jung says, it's a maturity that happens. So as children, we have an immature attitude or trait. A lot of adults still have that.
Right.
And as we evolve, we also mature. And sometimes it happens later in life just because of the process. We start to drop things more readily as we get older and older. You talk to people that are like in their 80s and 90s, what's the biggest life lesson? I should have dropped everything that I'm doing now. I should have dropped it when I was 40. I would have had a much more enjoyable time. Right. So eventually you're going to get there.
Right.
What's happened with us is that we've had opportunities along the way to drop our personas, drop our egos, and see what life is like on a more freer stage, as opposed to trying to do all the right things for all the wrong reasons.
Right. I mean, I would say, like, I understand what you're saying. I would like to actually take that wrong reason and maybe reframe it as, it's not necessarily wrong reason, is we're just trying to fix the problem, the discomfort, and what we don't know in a way that's not serving us, right? So yeah, it goes very much into like, there's a level of immaturity that's there, right? And so all of the things that we do that are not serving us are that feedback, right? That like they get adjusted and refined through the feedback, right? So when I do something wrong and realize it's wrong, or when I do something that is definitely not serving me, and in the moment, you're very right. If we're doing the best that we can, it feels like the right thing to do, right? Yeah. And then I find out when I get the feedback, yeah, that was the wrong thing to do, right? And now I know, right? But sometimes we're blindsided to the feedback, and we keep going at it in the same exact way until the feedback is louder, right? So yeah, I mean, is it the wrong reasons, or is it just
in the moment though? Like,
right,
like a really simple example of this is that I learned how to be an introvert. Right. So one of the things about conflict with introverts is that they do things to avoid confrontation. Right. So they and one of the traits can be being passive aggressive. And so in the moment, passive aggressive looks like the right thing to do.
Right.
So you do it, but it's really for the wrong reason. Right. That's what I'm kind of pointing to, right? It's something that's habitual conditioning, and we think it's the right action to take in the moment, but it really is for the wrong reason. And and when I understand the difference in the connection, I can then you really start to reflect on, all right, so what is the right action here? What is the right response? Oh, maybe I should confront somebody about this. Kind of
right. What would serve me more instead, right?
Yes.
Because I think there's also like delay in realizing that, because that's coping,
Yeah.
avoiding conflict, coping, right? So the intention is to kind of not get into discomfort, right? But in the meantime, in the background, through the wrong action, you're creating like discomfort on different levels, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
sometimes that discomfort is not as loud as the discomfort you're trying to avoid. But what happens is it stacks up over time and starts creating problems in different ways that you're not kind of almost not recognizing, right? Because you got relief from the initial discomfort through the avoidance, but you're blindsided to all the other discomfort that is now forming and created in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a blind spot there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's definitely blind. I mean,
Right.
obviously,
Right.
I mean, this is what people always say, like they always come back about, people should know better. Well,
Right.
if they did, they obviously would have done something differently at that time, right? So you can't say, yes, they should have known better. That's an easy cop-out to me.
Right.
But when you understand that we're always doing, right from day one, we're always doing the best we can, given the information and the understanding we have about the world.
Right.
And both of us have had transitions within our life that's really took away a lot of the paradigms that we were living with earlier in our life. And now we're able to reflect back on them and say, oh yeah, that was just a belief I held then, right? Now things have changed. I've evolved. I've matured. I'm not carrying a baggage of, oh, woe is me with me wherever I go.
Well, you saw the bag.
Yeah.
You saw that carrying a bag, it's
yeah.
like you've been carrying it so long, you don't even feel it. It's part of you, right?
It feels part of you. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, wait, what's this thing on my back? Like, I kind of get rid of this, right? It very much is like that. Like, blind spots are like that. We just don't know they're there, right? We just feel the discomfort. It feels heavy on my back. There's something that's weighing me down. But until I see it and I know what it is, I can't quite let it go, right? So,
can I ask you, like you shared with me earlier, last few days in our conversations, you had a glimpse of that baggage too when it came to self-care.
Yeah, and I think it's important to actually talk about that even with this knowledge that we have today, even after having done so much work on a very deep level, I personally have, and I know you have too, and for anyone who is doing the work, right? Mm-hmm. The lesson here is to really realize that the work keeps showing up.
All the time.
The work is very much, if you haven't done the work is thick and intense and it's work, right? But then once you have peeled off enough layers, right, at some point it does lighten up, but the work needs to be done constantly. It's a little bit like breathing air, it's a little bit like eating food. There's that maintenance that needs to be there because
there's constant.
Right.
There's a what's cool about this, and people have used the analogy of veils. Like when you've got an unnumber of veils, but as the veils become unfolded, right, you see you have more clarity. It doesn't mean that right. It doesn't mean that life all of a sudden doesn't become all of a sudden easy, or you still have all the things that life still offers you, but you see them at a different level. You see them with more clarity, and actually I find that the patterns and the baggage, if you want to refer to that, shows up more quickly. It's short, like you identify it faster.
There's two things. There's stuff that keeps showing up and forming, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it slips our awareness. And then guess what? if there weren't blind spots, we would know about them, right?
Yeah.
So even if you've done a ton of work, there's still some stuff there. And if you knew about it, you would have addressed it. But it's life, you know, life continuing and presenting itself that, you know, step by step shows you those blind spots, right? So to think that I've peeled enough and I've done the work and I'm done, that is an illusion. That is not what this is about, right?
Very true.
As you peel off, as you dig, and as you resolve, and as you see, there's more stuff that comes up. We're extremely layered. We have lived how many years of this life, right? And the older you are, the more there is, right? That's just
well. Not only that,
right?
there's also this study around generational stuff.
Right, this generational stuff that was imprinted on you the moment that you came out, right? So,
and I learned through you know, studying Sadhguru stuff about karma. Like, I always thought karma was a scorecard, in the sense of, you know, when you do good karma, you get right, or you do something, you get bad karma, you know, kind of a scorecard. And the way he explained it was that karma is just this generational things that are, like, it's the sins of our fathers that are being carried forward generation. And we have an opportunity of those things will be surfacing. And we also have an opportunity of, right? So, yeah, we're never done.
We're never done. But, you know, you did make a very good point. That as we continue to do the work, like all things, we get really good at catching it much faster, much faster, right? And also, you know, going back to the question that you asked, I didn't want to avoid answering it. Like, I realized, I'm not avoiding. I realized that I was looking in the wrong place, right? There were parts of me that were self-sabotaging on my professional level, right? So I kept digging there. But, like, we are everything that we do in life, professional, not professional, relationships, not relationships. It all goes back to us, right? Yeah. So I did do this and look at myself, but what I realized along the way, after digging and not moving it, was that what got lost along the way was my own personal self-care. I was so like focused on work and why is this not working? What part of me is sabotaging this? That along the way, I forgot to take care of myself. I forgot to give myself breaks. I forgot to really, like, do some maintenance stuff on my health, and, you know, like, really normal everyday things that we all try to do. Those just fell through the cracks because that's not where I was looking. You know, I was so focused on this has to do with my profession and self-worth and all of that. I was looking in the wrong place, you know. So I did all that work and I was still stuck. And you know what? Life keeps keeping you there until you see what it is. You keep hitting those walls, you know. And I very much realized at some point, oh, wow, look at the list of things that I have neglected that have to do with me and my personal life. So that's been a big realization for me. You know, I was digging, looking, searching, you know, like working on myself. And it's like, okay, this is still not shifting. And sometimes that can be dangerous too, because what can happen is like, all right, this is not working. Because I am digging, I am doing the work, you know. I've tried in so many different ways. Something must be wrong with me, or something is wrong with this way. Then this must not work. Then you go into a whole other separate rabbit hole, and then you can really start feeling like, you know, take a toll on your confidence, on what you believe, right? It can be dangerous too. Like sometimes, not just in this case with me, you know, like, but in general, like when we go too far with the self-work and the self-digging, that can be dangerous too, because you can now become someone who is constantly looking for something wrong with yourself, right? Constantly looking for something to fix. And, you know, and I think that's very much true with, people that do a lot of therapy and a lot of, in that sense, therapy can really not serve you, right? Because at some point, the digging and the investigation is no longer what you need, At some point, it becomes about, well, let's just look at the whole picture, like, let's just look at all these different parts of our lives that make us us, So almost like kind of get out of yourself and look at your life as a matter of fact, which is why I strongly believe that this process must be a holistic process that cannot
100%.
just be on the mental level. And that was the other big aha that I had was I've done so much work on the mental level.
Yeah.
And I realized what I needed to do more of was, I've done a lot of work on the emotional level too, but like on a somatic level, I needed to do more work. Right? I needed to shift some of this stuff on a somatic level. I needed to shift that so that the emotions could express, so that I could feel the emotions that were being kept really suppressed.
Yeah.
By what was kept in my body, what was stuck in my body. So I hope that answered the question.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, it certainly, gave us, like, I think the main point is we're always moving forward, and as long as we're playing the game, as long as we're in it, things will always happen. And what I like about, both our coaching perspectives is, and the fundamental difference between therapy always goes to the past, right. But coaching starts at the present. It starts at the point of entry, the point of contact, because this is where life happens. Life right. happens in this moment, not in right. the past. And that's one of the reasons why I don't bring up, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I've done a ton of, I think, interesting things. I've had a very interesting life. But I know that there's more interest going forward, like it's just,
I mean,
the possibilities are endless.
Right. So the past is there to give us a blueprint to start from, to give us the understanding of what has gone down and what has formed around those experiences, right? But you're absolutely right. This is where life is happening, is now, and life is going to happen moving forward, right? So have this awareness about the past and really understand it. It's important because it like, now we know what we need to shift, what those experiences have created in our lives and how they have shaped us, right? But continuing to just rehearse that and like dig into that keeps you there, right? So once you see it and okay, well, this experience created this kind of coping, or like I have repressed my emotions all these years, right? Great, right? It doesn't serve us to go back and be like, now feel sad about it and rehearse the experience, right? What serves us to be like, well, what I have formed around this is coping that hasn't allowed me to feel those sad feelings. What can I do to feel those feelings today and release them, right?
And that's kind of going back to that phrase, doing the right things for the wrong reasons. Now you're doing the right things for the right reasons.
Right.
And there's a fundamental shift that happens there.
Because
you're not getting stuck. You're not getting stuck anymore. You got progress.
And also it helps you detach yourself from feeling that is who you are, from feeling that you are destined to just feel this way forever, right? It's like, all I have to do is cry. All I have to do is release these emotions and understand that past event is no longer happening.
No.
And that I can choose to now feel happiness because I released that feeling that was inside. It was making me angry, making me avoidant. It was making me, like edgy and created discomfort, right? Now I know where the discomfort came from. The discomfort didn't come from, I'm just someone who feels uncomfortable inside. I'm not just someone that had that experience and therefore I will always feel like this. The discomfort was there saying, you still haven't expressed me, right? Mm-hmm. You still haven't cried. You still haven't released me. But once
you keep sending the child away from the front door all the time.
Right. Yeah. But once you have felt the feelings and you release them and you recognize that the past is in the past, it's done, mm-hmm. you always can choose something different today. But that choice is very difficult to make if you keep denying what you're feeling, denying yourself the expression of what's inside.
Well, and my experience of that is stuckness. Right. Like when you're looking towards, why aren't things changing for me? I understand I'm doing all this stuff. And like you said, at the intellectual level, and that's one thing, like you can have an intellectual understanding about 1,000 things, but until you have the real experience, the learning from that experience, then you can see, and also the discernment, the distinctions, like understanding what the distinctions are between that's my past, this is, those kind of things, the difference between habitual thinking versus creative thinking, something that's coming from a whole different source. You were playing with the word matrix this morning.
Oh, matrix.
but yeah, and then to understand that we all are living separate realities, and that's a huge piece too. Like when I started to look at the fact that it's my reality that's happening in front of me, regardless of what I am projecting onto that other individual. Like I could see the difference. They're just acting at their level of understanding. They're just acting based on their reality. No wonder why, right? So let's find some common ground. Let's find some understanding, right? So, and you can't do that at the intellectual level. You have to get down to the soul. And so I know there's a word that sometimes scares people, but it is a spiritual journey.
It is a spiritual journey. It is a journey of acceptance, it turns out, right? And what you're talking about is the difference for me personally that I find, the way I experience life now. I've done all this work as I became my coach and I see things the way I do.
Yeah.
The difference is that before I was unaware of the fact that I was looking through a lens that was just mine. Mm. And now with that awareness being there, it's a lot easier. I said easier, I didn't say easy. It's a lot easier to accept that there's other lenses that people are looking through and not take it personally, right? And it's not easy, right? Because you may see things from your lens and you may see where someone is at and you really want for them badly to see the fact that they are interpreting life through their own lens and that there is an easier, better way. And yet, here comes the acceptance. It is not up to you. It is not your life. It is not for you to decide that that's what they need to do, right? And so it's a little bit like removing yourself from this lens that you're looking through and really seeing that we all have our own little matrices that we're living in.
Yeah.
And accepting that. To me, that's the word of the month for me, right? It's acceptance. Acceptance. It will set you free.
And that is the truth. That is the truth that sets you free, is that acceptance piece, is to understand. And that's so, It's so cool because I always play with this one, right? This cloudy lens, right? And when I first got this kind of understanding, I thought, yeah, I could see how I could help, right? I could see how I could help that individual. And unfortunately, like you said, it's not up to me. It's not up to me, but it's not up to me to correct. I'm only here to connect. And I used to want to correct. And I still do in some ways. I fall into that. I'm going to be totally honest with that. But when I do catch myself, I can fall back and allow and accept. Okay, I understand. I understand that that's the way you see the world, and that's fine. If you come to me and say, I want to see things differently, then we have a chance of a conversation.
Right. And you know what? And I also want to point to the fact that this is the work, right? This is the work. Yeah. And this is the work that takes some time to wire in. And my suggestion would be, because just like you, especially when it comes down to our loved ones, our family, that desire to fix, because you love the person, like to want them to see things differently, may not go away, right? May still be there, and it may even be a bigger itch than it would be with, a colleague or a friend or someone that you don't know well, right? So once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere, right? And it is a practice. It is a practice of, you have to practice it in order for you to be able to shift into this frame of mind of accepting where the other person is at. What I find, like all things, it's a lot easier to get in that practice with people that you're not so close with, right? Yes. You start there, because it doesn't really matter who you practice on. What matters is the repetition of it, right? So start where you can. You have a chance of doing this. You have a higher chance of accomplishing this reframe, right? Because when it comes to the people that we love most, or our family, it's deeply personal. It can be triggering. It can be, like your feelings get in the way, and that desire.
Well, we have an agenda.
We have an agenda. We also love them. We also
that's part of it, right? The agenda is we want them to have the best of the best, right? And that actually gets in the way. That really gets in the way.
It gets in the way. And it's, sometimes it is extremely difficult to have to accept this, and accept that the person may never get there. So we're not saying it's easy. We're saying that is the road to freedom for ourselves, right? Because you still cannot, if you obsess over it, you still cannot make someone change. What happens is that you are now taking that on, and you are now getting frustrated. You are now making it about yourself, right?
That's what it is.
Really, the acceptance and the letting go piece is about, this is not about me. This is about them. Right?
Yeah. So I'm curious, and you mentioned this before we came on the air. So what pointed you in this direction? Like, you shared a lot of your journey, and and it took you to many, many different places. But there were physical places, and I'm curious, when did the mental shift happen for you, where you started to point yourself more inward than outward?
I mean, I think there's, I would say, obviously I was exposed to therapy since a young age. I think I mentioned, like, when I was right after my dad died, I saw a therapist, but I remember I wasn't really talking that much. And at some point, I feel like I remember it started being beneficial, but it didn't last very long. I was like 8 years old. So I found relief in that, right? So for a really long time in my life, even later in my life, in my teens, when I had severe depression and all of that, I saw that as a place to find relief. And now today I know that place was the place where I felt heard and seen, right?
Okay.
So I don't know that necessarily there was that mindset shift from victim to feeling empowered. There wasn't, actually. I do know there wasn't. It was more like, finally someone can see me and hear me. So it was more about hope and being seen and heard and actually having some of my needs met, right? But we're talking about an actual change in mindset. The very first one, well, there were a few. Like when I came to the United States all on my own, I started getting exposed to a different environment. So I started seeing myself as someone different, improving to myself that I could survive on my own, because what was reflected back was something completely different. I was no one to no one, right? And so I had an opportunity to just really start from scratch and not get pulled back into what my environment was constantly reminding me of, who I was or who I wasn't, right? So that was probably the beginning of something inside of me building that wasn't self-destructive. And then, like when I met John, for sure. So having someone that reflects back to you the good things about you, the good parts of you, created more self-confidence, more self-belief. It was a mirror that was held in front of me that was showing me a part of myself that I had never seen, right? So that definitely created a mindset shift, I would say, in terms of my own, believing in my own abilities, seeing my creative side, seeing my talent, seeing the loving parts of myself, right? What was missing then was like all of the trauma and all of the repressed experiences and traumatic events were still in there. But what was building was more like, I would say, my character, right? And then another major shift happened, through his illness. I know, like I mentioned, he got sick. I didn't really go into how significant that part of that the illness part of it was, because I now had to be fully dedicated to someone and, be there for him. And there was a lot of, just having to do something beyond myself, right? And really seeing myself as this person that was very selfless, had a very big heart. So maybe it was the first time that I really saw this really compassionate, empathetic, good side of myself, because I did not believe that I was good, right, inside. And then once he passed away, it was that huge spiritual shift, right? So, all of these shifts were like on a mental level, emotional level, and then the spiritual level came in. And then, it was dark years of really finding myself, and literally dark years of the soul. But that spiritual shift definitely was the spark for me to start thinking about my purpose in life.
Okay.
Because I remember with him dying, like on the other side of it, the things that mattered to me, the things that I valued, lost their value. Like everything seemed irrelevant and not as meaningful in the grand scheme of life, of the really touching with my own hands the fragility of life, and how someone can be there today and then be gone the next day. So that was a very, very big shift, right? And within the turmoil that I was going through emotionally, like mentally and all of that. So that was a really big shift. And then, like, I think life just prepares you for the next big, like, I think along the way throughout my marriage, the shift into motherhood that I just blindly stepped into. Oh, I have to do this. I'm this age. I got to do this. It's getting late, right? I got to do this. It's time.
Yeah.
There was not a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of processing. How is this going to change my life? How is this going to affect things? So that was another forced mindset shift. Like, it's definitely no longer all about me, right? Now I got to figure out how to sustain this person, keep this person alive, and like, oh, I can't go anywhere without this baby, like the baby needs 24/7 care, like, so that was a really big mindset shift too. And then the next one came during those years of really feeling disconnected. And, that was all of that unprocessed stuff that was still in there. All these big changes, all these big events happening in my life. I still hadn't been able to fully tap into all the trauma that I was carrying with me from my childhood, from the years of depression that I had, from the really unhealthy relationship with my mother and my brothers, my whole family dynamic. Because now the focus was very much on the traumatic experience of my husband's death, his illness, everything that I hadn't had a chance to process. And then getting into a new relationship. And like, there was so much that was building up on top of that there was no room or space or time to go even into all the things that were like nicely stored inside of me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then once that whole structure that I had built, that called my life, my family, started crumbling and falling apart, that was, like, now finding myself having to face that, but still having someone to care for, someone to love and nourish. And, that was like all this stuff that happened in my life. You would think it was the wall that was going to completely shift my life, right? It wasn't. Even my husband's death wasn't the thing that the last drop. The last drop was me finding myself in this really painful situation where my marriage I knew was going to end, and my kids were going to be, suffering from it, and not being able to go back to what the 8-year-old me had learned to do when things got really, really difficult and hard and painful and tragic, and having to find something new. So it really was a point of no choice. That is not a choice. Like, I have to make a new choice. So I found myself in front of a wall that I could no longer smack my head against. I had to turn the other way because I had to be present for my kids. I became a single parent overnight, right? Mm-hmm. And it was, I would say, survival, right? Survival was the thing that like maternal, instinct was the thing that gave me no choice but to face myself, but to find a different way. And I think that the moment that I saw that, the moment that I realized that, at first, it was massive overwhelm and desperation. How am I going to do this? But this really maternal instinct was like, no, like, you are needed. They are here and they depend on you. And you're going to have to figure this out in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I think in this case is where some of the coping really served me. Like, I was able to really suppress some of those strong emotions that would otherwise drag me deep into depression before, right? And keep going, a little bit numb. So like the numbing actually served me to be able to function for a little while. And I think, like all things, the moment that you see it and you realize it, things start dropping in your life that are helping you
Yes.
go
Yeah.
this direction. And immediately hypnotherapy dropped into my life. And immediately, you know, as soon as I did that, the relief that came from that allowed me to now walk down that different path and get set onto this journey, because it really is about making that different choice and sticking through the initial thickness of it. But the moment that a little bit of relief comes in, that becomes your fuel, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
relief
Yeah.
from the pain and from the discomfort and from the desperation, the moment that that little bit of relief comes in, that's a fuel. That's the crack into hope, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's that
get
little bit of light, right? Doesn't take much. Doesn't take much.
Doesn't take much. So for me, I would say this is really great that we're talking about this. It was an incremental shift into really making the U-turn, right?
And yet there's still that, and we joke about this rock bottom thing. But there was a defining moment in the sense of, like you said, like there was a realization, which is another key word, that I need to be doing something differently now. Like there was a pivot. There was a large enough pivot, or a strong enough pivot, that there was no other option.
There was no other option. And the very thing that I was so upset about, that obviously has to do with my ex-husband. I don't want to go too deeply into that.
No.
But it was the very thing that I was so upset about was the very thing that, had that not been there, I may not have made the U-turn. You know? So the thing that I was so angry about, you know, like it had to do with betrayal, feeling like it was like a loss, right? But with someone alive now, had that not been there, I would have not made that U-turn. It was really deep. Like it was the pattern. It was the wounding that deeply touched my life so many times, you know, loss in many different forms, right?
Yep.
A couple times in terms of my dad dying and my husband dying. And in this case, my ex-husband, you know, disappearing in a way while still alive. So it was the same thing in a different form. And like, it was so profound and so painful. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it is the thing that made me turn. It was a few different things, right? It was that, and it was the kids, and also like being like, enough is enough, you know, like maybe it was that last fall. Maybe it was that the last fall in that sense. So,
When it's interesting, like, and you know, that we hear that in so many of our stories and interviews that we've had with guests over the past, that they all have had these sort of defining moments. You know, I know that there's a guy I used to follow. Unfortunately, he's passed away now, but he was they call him he was the father of leadership. He was Warren Bennis, you know, and he talks about these crucible moments in our lives. Like they're literally, there's a death that happens within us. And we get to resurrect. We get to come back in a different form. Like you can never go back.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. And you know, as you're saying that, I realized that the death that happened within me was on really my heart. Like I had to shut my heart down because the level of empathy that I had, that, you know, that today I know there was a lot of codependency. A lot of it had to do with my wounding. That heart feeling deeply the way I did and being so disappointed had gotten in the way. It was, you know, it was blindsiding me. And for quite some time, that part of me shutting down was what I needed to do in order to be able to go in and do this kind of work, because my ability to feel on such a deep level had taken me to depression, had taken me to suffering and feeling so deeply that it debilitated me. So this feeling like my trust was betrayed and then shutting my heart off, in a sense, gave me that, hard edge that I needed to face that moment, that then was followed by having to let go of my business, COVID, homeschooling for a year and a half, right? Divorce, really contentious divorce. So, one could say you shut down your, like what came in was like a hardening of your heart. And that's really not the way to healing. I would argue today that was what was required in order to protect my heart for a while I could build infrastructure to go back into my heart and heal it, right? So today I see it very clearly, like where I went into even saying I will never be in a relationship ever again because it's too painful, right? Obviously I hear it and see it and I know that comes from a wounded heart. In that moment, it was what I needed to do. I needed to take this shattered heart and put it into a safe space. And that safe place came from really putting that hard shell around it for the moment, right? Yeah. In that moment, it felt like it was going to be the rest of my life. In that moment, I was certain that was going to be the rest of my life. I was never going to give my heart away again, right?
And that's the feeling that is very real in that moment. And I like what you say, in that moment, because that's the reality in that moment. And that's what I want to, tell our audience that we're always living that, whatever that reality is, this reality in the moment, right? And in reflection, because we're always doing the right thing, given our thinking. So that felt right for you in that moment. And then as things evolved, you went back into and started opening up and through the work and various other things, you came back to who you really are. And we continue to discover who we really are.
I'm continuing to work on my heart. I know that my heart's a little guarded still, right? That there's a part of me that's not quite going there. And you know what? I'm okay with that, because that's
the key.
Parts, right?
That's not a strategy.
There's other parts that have grown and evolved because this really loud, achy part of me just calmed down and felt protected and just allowed the rest of me to heal, right? So and that's key too, is that it allows things to happen. Like it's not like it's a should or I need to, right? As part of the solution. Like when you take the veil away, like when you get the clarity that you're getting right now, things start to drop off naturally, as opposed to strategies. Like if you recognize, like you said, I still have a guarded heart in certain areas. Perfect. Right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, if you start feeling like something is wrong with you around that, then now you're creating a whole
now you got a whole other set of issues.
So it's really about, for me, it's really about accepting that this is the process, this is the path to healing, and that there were so many other parts that needed my attention, that needed to evolve and grow and heal so that they could hold space for my heart to heal, right?
Yeah.
And I recognize that I'm not fully there. And the difference now is that I don't have any urgency for that too. I'm not forcing it. I'm allowing it to happen the way it needs to happen, right? Yeah. And without feeling bad about it, because honestly, 80% of why we stay stuck is because we feel bad about the things that we haven't been able to shift, right? We get into shame and guilt and, negative self-talk, so it's there. I'm aware of it. And it's really also important to feel where you're at, recognize it, and respect your own timing, right? Respect your own timing. That doesn't always come from your intellect. It never actually comes from your intellect, right?
And so I know we're sort of coming to our hour, but there's a few keywords that you've brought up that resonate with and will resonate with others if they want to choose to look towards this process is acceptance. That is huge. And the other one that I really love is another A word, and that's allow. And it's sort of attached to acceptance, right? Is we accept what is, and we allow life to unfold in its more natural way, as opposed to us intellectually trying to manage it in a way that we think is the way it should happen. And I just want to thank you for holding that space and demonstrating to me and others, and I'm sure people around you have seen it too, how evolved things have changed for you. Your strength, your vulnerability, like the paradox between the two, right? And being able to hold those positions and knowing, regardless of what life does throw at you, that you are strong, you're resilient, and that you can always take the next step. You can always take one more step. It's always one more step.
There's always one more step. And I love what you pointed out, this contrast between strength and vulnerability. And what I actually, discovered along the way is that vulnerability is strength, right?
Sure.
Where vulnerability becomes weakness is when we feel like we're weak, we're vulnerable. It really takes a lot of strength to be vulnerable, right? And it's more of a feminine, energy versus the masculine. I got this, which is very much how I learned in childhood to face adversity was through being strong and being firm and being very masculine in that sense. But vulnerability and allowing the vulnerability to be there, accepting it, that takes a lot of strength and takes actually, in my opinion, a lot of a strong character, a lot of confidence, in yourself.
Well, here's the piece. You were always that.
Yeah.
Now you're discovering it. And that's the other thing that I love about, the work that we do, is that it's a discovery of who you are. You get to see that you have that strength. It may not look that way right now, but so let's do this again. Okay.
We're doing this again. I'm pinning Rick down, pinning you down. But,
all right.
This was really, really good. This right here, everyone, was almost like coaching live, right?
Sure.
Reflecting back. One of the things, and then we can close it after this. One of the things that became clear to me after we talked, and I shared my story was, every time I tell my stories from a different point of view, it's a little bit different. It comes from the place that I'm in that moment, right? And I always find myself now reflecting back and getting insights from it and seeing things from a different perspective, right? Mm-hmm. So doing this exercise of reflecting back on that whole big story picture, right, that I presented in this hour, parts of it, right? We didn't reflect on everything, but what were the main takeaways? It was actually really helpful to me to see how far I've come, right? To really get that bird's eye view on the process that my life has been, on the journey and the path that, that I walked along. And that in on itself can really shift you into an empowered space. It can really help you grow and expand and evolve, So thank you. Thank you for holding space for me. And thank you for always knowing what's the most powerful question to ask in the moment, right? That's the trait of an amazing coach. I don't know what is.